Hey folks, so today I'm going to go over, I'm going to do a quick video here on split nose or noseless saddles like this one, like the ISM. This is the ISM road saddle. I get a lot of questions about these, so I thought I would just do a video on them. Just my basic thoughts, how to set up, whether they're good or not, that sort of thing. The biggest thing to understand about these noseless saddles, like the ISMs, is that they are fundamentally different, not only in how they look, but also in how you sit on them. Are they going to be for everybody? No. Should everybody try them? Well, potentially, but if you have what we call a traditional saddle with the traditional shape, and you have no problems and it feels great and you don't have any issues, then there may be no reason for you to try something like this. But if you're like a lot of people out there and you've struggled with saddle discomfort, any sort of saddle sores, pains, numbness, there's even people out there that are experiencing nerve damage, and some of the problems can get quite serious, then it might be worth taking a look at a saddle like this, because again, it does fundamentally change how we sit on the seat. The first thing to understand about these is they require you to sit in definitely a different pelvic position than you might be used to, and also on different tissues and different structures in your pelvis. So on a traditional saddle, something with a standard shape, in the perfect scenario, we're going to be bearing most of our weight through the anterior portion of the sit bones and potentially into the ischial rami, which we'll get into the anatomy here in just a second. But in some cases, you might even be bearing some weight on the glute muscle, and then hopefully, in a perfect scenario, we don't have a lot of weight on the perineum or the soft tissues in front, the sensitive parts that we're worried about. So let's do a quick little bit of anatomy here, and I'm going to turn this one on here. Okay, so this is a pelvis and a spine. You don't get caught up in the angle of the spine on here. It does not sort of assume position normal to the human spine, but we're really worried about and going to focus on the pelvis here. So what we call our sit bones are exactly that, ischial tuberosities, and it's what we sit on most of the time. But we sit on them when we're sitting in a chair, when we're sitting upright. And of course, on the bike, we don't sit upright, unless you're on a beach cruiser. We sit with some degree of pelvic tilt. So I've already marked on this pelvis. You can kind of see in the marker here. Let's see if I can get it on this camera. There we go. So the underside of the pelvis here. This black portion way back here is where the ischial tuberosity is, okay? So you can see how far back that is, and in order to sit on it, how upright that pelvis really needs to be. It needs to be pretty much vertical, okay? That would be the posture of sitting upright on the pelvis. What we really sit on here is this section, which is just in front, and it's called the ischial rami. It's the portion in red here, and again, it's just in front of that ischial tuberosity. It's just in front here. So this ischial rami is most of the time, especially on a road bike, where we're going to be bearing most of our weight, because as we roll forward, we're rolling that pelvis forward and contacting a different portion of the saddle. It's important to note, and this is where understanding how these work comes in, is, let's get it in this camera to my right here again. So it's important to note, so this is the pelvis. This is as if the person is lying face down, okay? So here's our sit bones way back here. Take a look at the angle that these ischial rami and then eventually the pubic rami here, how they come forward and connect here at the pubic symphysis. Because this angles in, as we roll forward on the pelvis, so as we tip forward into a more aggressive position, we are sitting on a narrower and narrower surface, okay? And so that's sort of the calculus that'll come into play with how these saddles work again. With the ISM saddles, you need to be prepared for the fact that the saddle will allow pretty much, in most cases, allow more anterior pelvic tilt than you might be used to. If you already have an aggressive road or time trial position, then this might be very easy to get used to because you're already used to having that anterior tilt. All you're going to have to then get used to is kind of finding your spot where you're going to localize to on the saddle. If you ride in a more endurance position, a more upright, more relaxed posture, then you're not only going to have to get used to probably having a little bit more tilt to that pelvis, but you're also still going to have to find your place. So there's just more new. There's more going on when you're coming from that end of the riding spectrum. If you're in a more upright position, and we'll get they do. ISM does make saddles for slightly more upright positions. I've had good luck with their PL and their PR series, and that stands for Performance Long, and then the Performance Recreation. They're reasonably similar, and some of those do allow for a little bit more upright positioning of the pelvis. But even still, it's still a different pelvic posture than, say, a traditional padded saddle. So how do we go about setting these up? There's some really good, I think the instructions on ISM's website, I'll link it in the description down below, are pretty good. They tell you a few things about it. First is that the ISM saddle is going to have to be set further back than your traditional saddle. And this is absolutely true. As you can see from these pictures, this is not my bike per se, but I set up a couple saddles on this bike. I set up a traditional saddle, and here is where the placement was. You can see it marked by that blue arrow. And this is where I found this ISM road saddle comfortable in the same road position on the bike. You can see it's quite a dramatic difference in the positioning there. And ISM recommends having the saddle 5 to 8 centimeters further back. They also say you're going to need to lower your saddle about half of a centimeter, about 5 millimeters. And that's probably true. It's probably a good rule of thumb to start with. And then they recommend with the tilt to keep the saddle level or potentially just a little bit nose down, maybe up to 2 degrees. And it depends on the saddle where you're going to be measuring that levelness from. So for a saddle like this one, it's got a little different profile where this front section up here is flat, and then it kind of right about in here it kind of angles up slightly, and that's kind of hard to capture on the camera. Let's see if maybe even on this one if that's possible. We get where it right about here it's flat, and then it kind of tips up here, and this is the section that we want to set flat is up in here. Other saddles don't have this little kick up, and so you can actually just set the entire saddle level. Another easy way they recommend too is setting the rails level with the ground. I haven't tested this. I haven't paid attention to that. I've always just focused on the saddle itself. But my guess is that it's probably a fairly reasonable place to start. In my experience, the tilt is pretty easy. It's actually, I think, a lot easier than with other traditional saddles, primarily because it is requiring the pelvis to tip forward more anyway. That I found that just setting a level, there's not a whole bunch of fiddling. The big X factor with this is making sure that you get the fore aft of the saddle correct, and making sure it's not too far back but not too far forward. And most people start with these too far forward. So to give you an idea, so we've already showed you the difference in how the setup is as far as how I had mine set up on my bike. But I can tell you that finding that right amount of aft placement of the saddle, it really leaves there's about 3 inches of empty, or I should say 3 fingers of empty space on the back of the seat, which is different, of course, than most saddles. Most saddles, you pretty much your glute muscles and everything kind of covers the back of the seat for the most part. And I really noticed that even just a small change in fore aft, all of a sudden the saddle went from feeling kind of unstable and uncomfortable and pushing in kind of the wrong places, and my hips were bobbing up and down quite a bit, to after even just a couple millimeters change, to everything felt pretty good, everything felt pretty well supported, and hips stopped moving vertically too much, etc. So it really is a very fine line, and that's something you're going to need to fiddle with a lot. So I'd like to give you an idea kind of also what you can expect it to feel like. I don't ride one on a daily basis, and so switching to these, I kind of get to relearn what it feels like. And I definitely notice that I'm sitting, perhaps a little bit with a little bit more pelvic tilt. I'm sitting a little bit further forward on the saddle. I think that we actually bear most of our weight back in here, and the changes we have are very subtle. So I can show you, here are the pressure graphs, pressure maps from when I was sitting on this bike. So here is with a traditional saddle, and you can see where the kind of the hot spots, where the most pressure is in the red. And when I drop a line on there and measure in millimeters, it's about 80 millimeters across. Okay, so kind of have an 80 millimeter stance on this saddle. On the ISM, it goes down to about 70 millimeters. And this may seem like a lot, but let me show you on this. I was at 80 millimeters, which is about sitting here, right? On this pelvis anyway. And if we kind of assume roughly the same pelvic angle, if I go down, because it shrinks down pretty quickly, if I go down and find where 70 is about there. So I'm moving from about here to here, which is a pretty small area for a fairly aggressive shift. So yeah, again, there's about, maybe they can probably see that a little bit better. There's about 80 from here to there, okay? And then if I come down, there's about 70, about here to there. So we're talking about just coming forward just a few, maybe a centimeter at the most. So again, when you're trying out these saddles, if you do try one out, or if you're having trouble, I think I would recommend. I've had fairly good success with these. Just remember to make sure the saddle gets set up a little further back. Make sure it's level, and then be real patient with it. I would even take tools out on a ride and make small adjustments to fore aft and to really find your spot and where you can sit on it. So. That's it for this one. If you have any questions about these, please put them in the comments below. I'll be happy to get to those. And anything else, if I missed anything on this, or if you want to hear about any other aspect of these saddles, they have a whole bunch of them now, so let me know about that. And that's about it for now. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks.